Beppe gave him a raucous welcome. "So you own the Duccio block for free?" He grinned, scratching his bald scalp. "Beppe, like it or not, you've got me under your wing for 2 full years." The foreman groaned. "As though I don't have troubles enough keeping the cathedral from falling down. But the Board of Works say give him everything he wants: marble, chisels, pretty girls." Michelangelo laughed aloud, bringing the artisans running. They welcomed him to the yard. The Duomo workyard ran the full width of the block behind the Duomo works buildings, from the Via dei Servi on the north side to the Street of the Clock on the south, bound in by an 8-foot brick wall. The front half, where the Duccio column had lain, was the quarters for the artisans maintaining the cathedral. The rear half was used for storage of lumber, brick, paving, stone. Michelangelo wanted to be close to the workmen so he could hear the sound of their tools and voices, yet not to be involved. In the center of the rear yard there was an oak tree, and behind it, in the wall admitting to a nameless passage, an iron gate, locked, rusted. The gate was exactly 2 blocks from his house. He could work nights when he wished, and holidays when the main yard would be locked. "Beppe, is it permitted to use this gate?" "Nobody forbids. I locked it myself 10-12 years ago when tools and material were missing." "Would it be all right if I used it?" "What's wrong with the front entrance?" "Nothing. But if we could build my workshop around this gate, I would come and go without bothering anybody." Beppe chewed toothlessly on this idea to make sure Michelangelo was not repudiating him or his crew. Then he said, "I do it. Draw me plans." He needed 30 feet along the back wall to be paved for his forge and tools, and for keeping his wood dry. The brick wall would have to be raised another 9 feet so that no one could see the column or watch him working on it when he mounted his scaffold. On each side, for a distance of about 20 feet, he wanted low plank walls, but the work area would be open to the sky for the 9 dry months of the year, and at the front as well. The giant would be bathed in the full sunlight of the southern arc as the brilliant Tuscan sun made its daily transit across the city. He decided to keep the workshop in the piazza. It would be a place to go to when he wanted to get away from the large marble. Argento would sleep there and work with him here until during the day. The Duccio block was so seriously gouged in the center of its 17-foot length that any attempt to move it in its present state could prove fatal. A jarring motion or lurching impact would split the column in 2. He bought several of the largest pieces of paper he could find, pasted them over the face of the horizontal column, and cut out a sagoma, a silhouette, taking care to measure the deep cut accurately. He then took their sheets to the workshop in the piazza and had Argento nail them up on the wall. He moved his workbench around to face the paper silhouette, began fitting together a second series of sheets on which to draw a design of the David, indicating which parts of the existing block would be discarded, which parts used. Back at the yard, he chipped out marble from the top and bottom corners, balancing the weight so that the column would no longer be in danger of cracking. Beppe's workmen established a smooth path to the new work area. They used block and tackle to raise the 2,000-pound column and get rollers under it. The column was moved slowly. As each rounded beam fell out the back end, a workman ran ahead to reinsert it onto the front end. By nightfall, the column, though still in a horizontal position, was inside Michelangelo's enclosure. He and his giant David block were alone. Now, for the first time, he realized that the drawings that had satisfied the boards were no longer of any use to him. He had outgrown these elementary stages of his thinking. All he knew for sure was that his was to be the David he had rediscovered, that he would use the opportunity to create all of the poetry, the beauty, the mystery, and the inherent drama of the male body, the archetyped and essence of correlated forms. He burned his earlier drawings, settled down to the simplest beginning, probing within himself. The Greeks had carved bodies from their white marble of such perfect proportion and strength that they could never be surpassed. But the figures had been without mind or spirit. His David would be the incarnation of everything Lorenzo de' Medici had been fighting for, that the Plato Academy had believed was the rightful heritage of man, not a sinful little creature living only for salvation in the next life, but a glorious creation capable of beauty, strength, courage, wisdom, faith in his own kind, with a brain and will and inner power to fashion a world filled with the fruit of man's creative intellect. His David would be Apollo, but considerably more, Hercules, but considerably more, Adam, but considerably more, the most fully realized man the world had yet seen, functioning in a rational and humane world. How to draw these convictions on paper? During the early weeks of autumn, he achieved only fragmentary answers. The more he was frustrated, the more complicated he made his drawings. The marble lay silent and inert. Maybe nobody can bring it to life, suggested Beppe, where Michelangelo seemed depressed. Fine time to tell me. Like asking a girl, does she want to be a mother after she's in the family way? Beppe, I'm going to have to model in marble instead of clay. Could you buy me a piece, about a third as large as this one? I don't know. They said give workmen material, but a 5-foot block, that's money. He delivered, as always, a fair enough block. Michelangelo plunged into the marble, trying to rough his way through his problem with hammer and chisel. What emerged was a strongly built, primitive young man, the face idealized and indeterminate. Granacci, seeing the marble, said with a puzzled expression, I don't understand. He stands with his foot resting on Goliath's head, but at the same time he's got a rock in one hand and is reaching over his shoulder for his slingshot. You have two minds. The upper half is about to use the slingshot. The bottom half is already resting triumphantly on its victim. You flatter me. I have no mind at all. Then why not spend a couple of days with me at the villa? Michelangelo looked up sharply. It was the first time Granacci had acknowledged that he had a villa. You will be diverted. You'll forget your David for a couple of days. Agreed. I can't remember smiling for weeks. I have something at the villa that will bring a smile. You did indeed. A girl by the name of Vermilia, blonde in the Florentine tradition, with her hair plucked back to give her a higher brow, her breasts propped up in a gown of green taffeta. She proved a charming mistress of the villa, presiding over their late candlelit supper on a porch overlooking the Arno as it wound its way to the sea. When she'd gone inside, Granacci said, Vermilia has a wide variety of cousins. Would you like her to choose one for you? I think she's lonely here. You could have a suite overlooking the city. It would be a pleasant way of life for us. Thank you, Caro. I have a way of life. As for casual encounters, Beppe says, what you put into the ladies at night, you can't put into the marble in the morning. He sat by his window, sleepless, watching the towers and domes of Florence under a scimitar of moon, rising to pace through the series of 3 small rooms, then going back to his vigil by the window. Why had he carved 2 Davids into his 5-foot block, when already triumphant over Goliath? The other just preparing to hurl the stone. No piece of sculpture could stand at 2 different moments in the realm of time, any more than it could occupy 2 different areas in the realm of space. How he would have to take a stand, decide which of the 2 warriors he was going to sculpture. By dawn, he had worked his way back step by step. Sharp light flooded his mind. Goliath had to go. His head, black, dead, blood-spotted, ugly, had no place in the realm of art. It should never have been included in the first place. The full meaning of David was obscured by having that horrendous head forever chained to his ankles. What David had done became a mere physical act ending in the slaying of an opponent. Yet to him this was only a small part of the meaning of David, who could represent the daring of man in every phase of life: thinker, scholar, poet, artist, scientist, statesman, explorer. A giant of the mind, the intellect, the spirit as well as the body. Without the reminder of Goliath's head, he might stand as the symbol of man's courage and his victory over far more important enemies. David had to stand alone, even as he had stood on the plains of the valley of the Terebinth. This decision left him exalted and exhausted. He climbed between Granacci's fine linen sheets, fell into a deep sleep. He sat in his shed before the column, drawing David's head, face, and eyes, asking himself, what is David feeling at this moment of conquest? Glory? Gratification? Would he feel himself to be the biggest and strongest man in the world? Would there be a touch of contempt for Goliath, of arrogance as he watched the fleeing Philistines and then turned to accept the plaudits of the Israelites? All unworthy emotions, none of which he could bring himself to draw. What could he find in David triumphant, he asked himself, worthy of sculpturing? Tradition portrayed him after the fact. Yet David after the battle was certainly an anticlimax. His great moment already gone. Which then was the important David? When did David become a giant? After killing Goliath? Or at the moment he decided that he must try? David, as he was releasing with brilliant and deadly accuracy the shot from the sling? Or David before he entered the battle, when he decided that the Israelites must be freed from their vassalage to the Philistines? Was not the decision more important than the act itself, since character was more critical than action? For him, then, it was David's decision that made him a giant, not his killing of Goliath. He had been floundering because he had imprisoned himself in David at the wrong moment in time. How could he have been so stupid, so blind? David pictured after Goliath could be no one but the biblical David, a special individual. He was not content to portray one man. He was seeking universal man, every man, all of whom from the beginning of time he had faced a decision to strike for freedom. This was the David he had been seeking, caught at the exultant height of resolution, still reflecting the emotions of fear, hesitation, repugnance, doubt. The man who wished to follow his own ways among the hills of Jerusalem, who cared little for the clash of arms and material reward. The man who killed Goliath would be committed all his life to warfare and its consequence, power. The reluctance would still be fading from his face. This giving up of the pastoral life in which he had been happy for a life of courts and kings, of jealousy and intrigue, of control and disposition of other men's destinies. This was the dichotomy in all men, the reflective life and the active. David would know that the man who gave himself to action would have sold himself to an inexorable master, who would command him all the days and years of his life. He would know intuitively that nothing gained as reward for action, no kingdom or power or wealth, could compensate a man for the loss of his privacy. To act was to join. David would not be sure he wanted to join. He had been a man alone. Once he tackled Goliath, there would be no turning back, for far more true if he vanquished Goliath than if he were vanquished. It was what he sensed that he would do to himself, as well as what the world would do to him, that made him doubtful and adverse to changing the pattern of his days. His had been a hard choice indeed. This concept opened wide vistas to Michelangelo. He soared, he drew with authority and power. He modeled in clay 18 inches high, his fingers unable to keep pace with his thoughts and emotions. And with astonishing facility he knew where the David lay. The limitations of the block began to appear as assets, forcing his mind into a simplicity of design that might never have occurred to him had it been whole and perfect. The marble came alive now. When he tired of drawing or modeling, he would join his fellow members of the Cauldron for an evening of talk. Sansovino moved into the Duomo workyard to begin carving a marvel of St. John baptizing Christ, for over the east door of the baptistry setting up his workshop between Michelangelo and Bepi's stonemasons. When Rustici became bored with working alone on his drawings for Boccaccio head and an Annunciation in marble, he would come to the yard and sketch with Michelangelo or Sansovino. Next, Baccio joined them in the Duomo workyard to design a crucifix, which he hoped the Church of San Lorenzo was going to commission. Bugiardini would bring in a hot dinner in pots from a Derby osteria, and the former apprentices would spend a companionable hour, Argento serving the food on Michelangelo's plank work table against the rear wall. Soge, proud of his former associates, visited once in a while, wheeling in a cart of cooked sausages for the communal dinner. Every now and then he would climb the hill to Visol to give Luigi a lesson on Pietra Serena, which the 6-year-old seemed to enjoy. He was a bright-faced, handsome child, resembling his uncle Giuliano with Contessina's alert mind. "You are wonderful with Luigi Michelangelo," remarked Contessina. "Giuliano loved you too. Sometime you must have your own son." He shook his head. "Like most artists, I am a mendicant. When I finish one commission, I must go in search of the next, work in whatever city it takes me to. Rome, Naples, Milan, or even Portugal, as Sansovino did. That is no life for a family. It goes deeper than that," said Contessina, in her small, sure voice. "Marble is your marriage. The Bacchus, Pietà, David are your children. They stood close as they sometimes had in the Medici palace. While you are in Florence, Luigi will be as your son. The Medici need friends, and so do artists." Cardinal Piccolomini sent a representative to Florence who demanded to see the statues for the Bregno altar. Michelangelo showed the agent the completed St. Peter and St. Paul, and the roughed-out figures of the popes, promising to finish them soon. The next day Baccio came into the shed, his once again mischievous face wreathed in smiles. He had received the commission for the crucifix. Since San Lorenzo had no work for space for him, he asked Michelangelo if he might share the shop in the piazza. "Instead of paying rent, I could finish the 2 popes from your drawings," he exclaimed. "What do you say?" He did the pieces creditably, with 4 figures, and the St. Francis completed. Michelangelo felt he would have a respite from Cardinal Piccolomini. When Baccio began carving his crucifix, Michelangelo was glad he had taken him in. The work was honest and full of feeling. Argento swept out the shop each evening when he returned from the Duomo. He too was content in Florence, working in the Duomo workshop all day. At night, having the company of the other young apprentices of the piazza, who also slept in their shops, each providing food for a common cook pot. Best of all, Giuliano da Sangallo returned from Savona, where he had completed a palace for Cardinal Rovere at the family estate. Leaving Savona, Sangallo had been intercepted and kept a prisoner for 6 months by the Pisans, and had to be ransomed for 300 ducats. Michelangelo visited with him at the family home in the quarter of the Sun, near Santa Maria Novella. He still insisted that Cardinal Rovere would be the next pope. "Tell me about your design for the giant," he demanded. "And what have you heard of interesting architectural jobs in Florence?" "There are several of great urgency," said Michelangelo. "A revolting table strong enough to turn a 2,000-pound column of marble, so I can control the light and sun. A 15-foot scaffold, one in which I can change the height and work all around the block." Sangallo was amused. "You are my best client. Let's get pen and paper. What you need is a series of 4 towers with open shelves that take planks from either direction, like this. As for your turntable, that's an engineering task."